Hey, Skills Champions, it's Rachel Unruh here with my colleague Katie Spiker for another episode of Skills on the Hill. We've got a lot to talk about today. As folks know from our last time we were here, Builds Back Better is stalled. That's the package that would make the investment in human capital that is so essential to ensure that folks in local communities across the country benefit from the job creation that comes from the infrastructure package that passed last year. Builds Back Better, we're likely to see a much smaller package if it moves forward. We're going to continue to fight for the $40 billion in workforce funding in there. But what seemed pretty clear after the last round is that the president's community college proposal won't be in whatever package moves forward. So a lot still up in the air on Builds Back Better. At the same time, there was some huge progress on workforce development proposals last week. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So Katie, last Friday, the House voted on its America Competes bill, which is legislation to support innovation and competition abroad. And of course, the Senate had already passed their version of that. And leading up to the vote on that package, there were a lot of amendments put on the table. And we're going to talk about those today. So Katie, let's first talk about what some of the provisions were that ended up in the House Pass Competes bill, specifically that would support expanded capacity for workforce training at community colleges.
It was a busy week last week for folks on the Hill and for folks in our network who took a lot of really quick action around some of these amendments. So there were three key provisions that were included as amendments to the American Competes bill in the House that our network has heard us talk about many times as top priorities. So the first was an amendment that combined provisions consistent with the Bipartisan Jobs Act and the Bipartisan College Transparency Act. The Jobs Act, as folks know, expands Pell Grants eligibility to high quality short-term training programs, and the amendment included provisions consistent with that proposal. It also tacked on to the expansion and the inclusion of short-term Pell a provision that's consistent with the College Transparency Act that provides student-level data and program-level data on programs through community colleges and across all post-secondary education. It was really important for many of the champions on the Hill that these two provisions be coupled together. What these do is, first of all, they're two of the four provisions that we focused on as part of our Making College Work for Working Students campaign. And they would provide businesses and students with both access to that tuition support to be able to attend short-term programs, as well as the data and outcomes in order for businesses, community colleges, and students to evaluate which of the programs are the right fit for them. The other provision that was included in the American Competes Act was a provision consistent with TAAACT grants that would expand access and would authorize a program that would fund community college partnerships with businesses, as well as then providing pathways for students and support for institutions and community colleges to create more programs that meet that industry demand. What's important to note about the TAAACT provisions that we saw in America's Competes that's a little bit different from some of the conversations we've been having around Build Back Better is that this program would just authorize this new TAAACT program. It wouldn't actually fund the program. So we'll be talking a little bit about what some of those differences are, but that's just one thing that's a little bit different from the way that we've been talking about some of the advocacy around TAAACT as part of the Reconciliation or Build Back Better bill.
Thanks, Katie. So despite the fact that for now, the president's community college promise proposal is on hold, it sounds like there's quite a bit of support across those, potential support across those three proposals for community college workforce training. But that's not all that was in America Competes. There were a couple other big workforce provisions in there that have been NSC priorities. So can you tell us about those?
It was also an amendment to pass the National Apprenticeship Act as part of the package. The National Apprenticeship Act would reauthorize the National Apprenticeship Act, which right now is about a 3-paragraph long piece of legislation. It would include a lot of the priorities around supporting pre-apprenticeship and industry partnerships between businesses and community organizations that are supporting the expansion of apprenticeship. There also was an amendment that was consistent with the bipartisan Builds Act that would support a discretionary grant program to fund the training costs associated with preparing people for in-demand infrastructure jobs. Builds Act, as well as all of these provisions that we've talked about from both community college capacity and apprenticeship. A lot of the interest that we saw from members across the aisle on these provisions were tied to the fact that the bipartisan infrastructure bill create a lot of demand for workers, but didn't include the necessary level of investment and resources in training those workers. And so that message really seemed to resonate with members in a different way than we've seen it in the past few months.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it also makes a lot of sense that so many workforce and community college provisions were attached to a bill focused on innovation and competitiveness, because as we know, access to education and training is really a major driver of innovation and competition. So given that, Katie, what are the prospects for this to move forward? I mean, I know there was a Senate passed bill, obviously, now we have a House passed bill. What's the likelihood that these provisions, A, are going to stay in a final America Competes package, and B, get the necessary funding that they need?
That's kind of the two things that we're left to advocate for now. So the first is just to reiterate where we went around the TAAACT grants, that all of these provisions are just, as included in the Competes bill, would authorize or create the programs. It would not require Congress to appropriate the dollars to fund them. So that conversation would have to happen as either part of a Build Back Better bill or as part of the annual appropriations process. So it's 2 steps to both create the program and then to fund it through this process. And for some of these programs, that could be a valid path forward. So when TAACT passed in as part of the last recession, the original TAACT, the program was authorized in a separate package from which it was funded and appropriated dollars. And in an instance like that, it helps spread across members of Congress who is acting as a champion for some of these workforce programs, and so helps build support among members. And we may see more members engage in making sure that congressional leadership and appropriators include dollars for workforce programs. For some of the other programs, I think we're less likely to see them attached to this package and attach with appropriations, and particularly for some of the apprenticeship provisions and Builds Act. Those are things that we'll be pushing for and are critical components of an inclusive economic recovery. There's also been discussion, however, about those provisions being included in a WIOA reauthorization, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, which is a little bit further down the road. But I think that a lot of the folks who are in charge of making some of those decisions on the Hill see those apprenticeship provisions as being as making sense within a workforce WIOA package. Now, the provisions around the community colleges, particularly the short-term Pell and College Transparency Act provisions, there's a lot of momentum behind including those in a final package. Certainly, we've seen the leads on those packages in the House take really strong efforts in order to bring together both Republicans and Democrats to support that amendment when it passed the House last week. Congressman Gonzalez, who's the lead on jobs, a Republican lead on jobs in the House, is also retiring at the end of this Congress. And so he, as well as Congressman Levin, have a lot of interest in moving those provisions forward. On the Senate side, Senator Kaine and Senator Portman lead jobs. Senator Portman is also retiring at the end of this Congress, and Senator Kaine and Portman both put a lot of effort in trying to get their bill to attach as an amendment to the Senate passed competitiveness bill. And I anticipate that our network will be hearing from us, and that those congressional champions will be pushing to ensure that provisions consistent with their amendments are in that final USICA or competitiveness bill when and if it moves forward as well.
So it sounds like there's some really good opportunities to get the short-term Pell and College Transparency Act provisions across the finish line. Of course, it's going to take continued advocacy. And for the other proposals as well, regardless of what vehicle they're attached to, this is forward momentum, and it's all because of the advocacy of our network. And if you want to be a part of that continued advocacy and just learn more about where all these proposals are headed, we hope you will join us for our 2022 Skills Summit coming up very soon next week. Just go to our website, nationalskillscoalition.org, on the homepage, and you can register for that virtual Skills Summit today. Katie, thanks so much for the updates, and we will see everybody soon.